Invented Lives opens in the mid-1980s, Gorbachev era, in Leningrad. And we meet the main character, Galina Kogan. She is a 25-year-old young woman, and she is dashing home from hospital where her mother, her beloved mother, has just died, and she is bereft. The two of them had decided to emigrate to America when Soviet Jews were allowed to leave. And due to a chance, and it really is a chance, accidental meeting with an Australian, she bumps into him on the way home from hospital. She decides that she's going to go to Australia. It's a grief-struck decision because the word Australia has never before passed her lips. Once she gets to Australia, she's a very, very resourceful young woman, and she manages as well as you can in a very, very strange society. But a year or so after she's been in Melbourne, she realizes she's very, very lonely, and she contacts Andrew, the young Australian mosaicist who she met briefly in Leningrad and is the reason why she's in this place in the first place. Through Andrew, she meets his parents, Sylvie and Leonard Morrow. Theirs is a long marriage, and I would say probably a very successful marriage, but both of them harbor desires and secrets that they do not share with the other. When Galina enters their lives, she does as strangers always do. She disrupts the balance that this family has maintained for many years. So there are my four main characters. This novel began in 2013. Australia has started again with their offshore detention, and I was appalled, as so many people were. And at the same time, I'd been reading about Putin's Russia. So here I'm thinking, when I'm watching these poor asylum seekers, and I'm thinking, nobody chooses exile. Exile is the option when choices run out. Why isn't it obvious? And at the same time, I'm reading about Putin. You can't understand Putin without going back to the Soviet years, and in fact, further back than that. And it occurred to me that I wanted to write a book about exile. And of course, I remembered when Bob Hawke opened our doors to the Soviet Jews and how very, very different it was. And suddenly, Galina Kogan entered my mind. Her name wasn't that, by the way, at the time, but the idea of a young Soviet Jew who knows nothing about being Jewish coming to Australia came to mind. It was very interesting, the notion of invented lives to me. This was not the title of the book during the years of writing. In fact, the working title was The Science of Departures, which is actually taken from a poem of Osip Mandelstam. I have studied the science of departures. Often you don't know exactly what a book is about until it's well and truly finished, several drafts along. But as I was redrafting, the idea of hidden lives, of inventing yourselves, became obvious, not just for Galina. I mean, obviously she has to invent herself. Nobody has any idea what it's like to be a Soviet Jew who knows nothing about Jewishness here in Australia in the late 1980s, or indeed even now. But in fact, we learn as the novel goes along that Andrew, the mosaicist, he's a very, very deeply shy man, and he has to invent a public persona for himself. And we have Sylvie, who is in many ways a 50s housewife. She was born in the 1930s. She had no opportunity to go to university. She was always very bright. She came top of her school, but there was no question of her going to university. And she has a hidden life too. If she didn't, I think that she would absolutely go crazy, as so many women did with limited opportunities. And then we have Leonard, who on the outside, he is a successful businessman, he is a loving husband and a father, but he has a secret life. And you could say that the secret life is perhaps the real life, and that what we see and what he spends 3/4 of his life on is the invented one. And as I was writing these characters, I thought, you know, it's what we do in our normal everyday life anyway. We're not the same with family as we are with colleagues, as we are with the publisher that we're trying to impress. When I realized I wanted to write a book about exile, because it seemed to me that so many people didn't understand what exile actually meant. And it occurred to me that everybody has had some sort of experience of exile. You know, when you've been disbarred by the group you want to belong to at school, when you don't get taken in at the tennis club that you want to go to, everybody has a notion of exile. So it was a very deliberate attempt to explore this notion in a way that perhaps a lot of people could relate to. So we've got Galena, exile from country, exile from culture, exile from the past, and that's a very important one with her. Andrew, being so incredibly shy, is exiled from the community of men and women that we all take for granted, the social community that we take for granted. Sylvie, so smart, could have done anything. She is in exile from the potential that she knows that she's got, and the desires, the intellectual and creative desires that she has, the life that she has got. She is in exile from those own inner, those true inner needs and desires and talents too. And dear Leonard is in exile. I won't say why. He's in exile from a very, very intrinsic part of himself. So there are many ideas of exile. Perhaps I could read the one that we're perhaps most familiar with, which is the idea of exile from country. And this obviously relates to Galena in the novel. She's in Australia, she's managing, but it's not easy. From birth to death in the Soviet Union, you knew exactly who you were and how you slotted into the system. Complex processes were simplified and streamlined. There was little need to think for yourself and no rewards if you did. She found the contradictions of Australian life confusing and the flexibility they demanded of her stressful. While she knew this was all part of the West's freedoms, she was coming to see that freedom was not the safe, happy-go-lucky state she had assumed it would be. And there was something else, something unexpected and unnerving. With so much freedom, it was easy to feel that no one was looking after you. Nothing was simple, nothing was clear, nothing was easy. She read about Australia's history and geography, its flora and fauna, the Great Barrier Reef, the Aboriginal people. She even read books about Australian cricket and football. So many books, but what she really needed was a manual on how to be an Australian. Exile, it seemed to her, was a juggling act between past and present, remembering and forgetting. And her emigration was a form of exile, given she couldn't ever return. This loss of place was hard enough, but the way in which exile divided her mind was even worse. She needed her past, but not so much of it that it would sabotage her new life. Was this the condition of exile, to want too much of memory while at the same time trying to control it? When it concerned her mother, she wanted to remember everything except the last illness. As for the rest, she tried to remember particular people, particular places, particular experiences. Demanding of memory, yet restricting it, she was rarely satisfied. And there were the black holes, deliberately created in order to manage her new life, but which at the same time stifled crucial aspects of who she was. That more people did not collapse under the burden of exile was remarkable. There was one prominent overlap between Australia and the Soviet Union that she found very amusing. The British Queen Elizabeth was as ubiquitous here as Lenin was at home. The Queen's image was on all the coins, it graced a good many of the stamps, it hung in public buildings, it appeared in churches and schools. Queen Elizabeth here, Lenin at home. The plenitude of Lenin ensured that all Soviet citizens were caught in his aura and the Soviet ideological web. So what might the omnipresent Queen reveal about the Australians? I think her experience was typical of many, many women. And I have to say, I think of my mother. My mother was just a little bit old, born a little earlier than Sylvie. And she matriculated from Macrob in 1945 when the war finished. And of course, the returning soldiers had first dibs on anything at university, but there was no way she was going to university. I mean, university was wasted on a woman, and particularly a pretty woman, which she was. So her options were very few. And in fact, the main option was that you married. In fact, within 12 months of her leaving school, she was engaged. So I think it's a typical story. And certainly since this book has been published, there have been many women who've come and told the same story about their mothers. And it's interesting because it's cross-cultural and it's also across economic status as well. What I find unique about Sylvie is how she chose to survive. There are some women who manage because they do lots of volunteer work and, they might have craft and art activities. But Sylvie, she plunges into other lives through a collection of letters that she has. And through these letters, she's taken into other lives and other worlds and other minds, and it comes back and enriches her own life. No, it's not. And in fact, we discover that the line that Andrew touts, that art never saved anybody, he doesn't actually believe in himself. It was a common enough belief amongst certain groups back in the late 1980s, and it's not one that he adheres to. And in fact, art has saved him. And after that argument that he has with Galena, he works through the night, and we see how art has saved him. Through all of my work, art has been important, whether it's music or the visual arts or indeed literature. What art has the capacity to do is to shine a light on the ordinary and to reveal the ordinary in new ways. It's very, very hard to question the life that you're actually in. But art gives you a different perspective. So I actually think that Andrew and Galena art will actually bring them together. But just more generally speaking, we need art. We need art in order to understand ourselves, and we also need art in order to slow down and have a look at this world that seems to be hurtling on oftentimes without us. So I'm all in favour of that. Well, because it's typical of all my novels, I leave the ending open-ended. And there's a very good reason for that, reading is a very active and intimate activity, that people who have followed that book from the beginning to the end, they will have their own ideas as to what should happen, and the book should allow them to put their ideas in. And in any one audience, about half will think that Andrew and Galina get it together and walk off into the sunset, and the other half are absolutely dismissive of it.